Second, Mike.
Okay.
You're good.
You ready to roll? Thank you. We call the Joint Review Board organizational meeting to order at 5:03. And I'll take the roll call. We've got Pete Grender.
I'm here.
Okay. Sean Paff.
Present.
Bob Soldner. Bob's here.
Present.
There we go. Okay. And Lori Grigg.
Here.
Okay, and anybody from Dane County at all? Chuck Hicklin, Adam Gallagher? Hopefully they'll join us, one or the other will join us in progress with that. So then when we move on to election of members, and I'm actually the city representative on the Joint Review Board, but we need to nominate and appoint a new citizen member here, and I think Sean Paff is here for that purpose, and then we would need to eventually elect a chair of the Joint Review Board as well. So I would entertain any nominations to nominate the public member. Any takers out there? Otherwise, I'll nominate Sean Paff as the public member of the Joint Review Board.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations for the public member? Seeing none, all in favor of Sean Paff as the public member of the Joint Review Board, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Sean, you're the public member.
Easiest election I've ever won.
Then I would entertain nominations for chair of the Joint Review Board group here. I usually don't serve as chair. We usually have somebody else kind of get nominated and authorized to serve as chair. So I would entertain nominations for chair of the Joint Review Board. I guess I'll nominate Sean if he's willing to be the chair of the Joint Review Board.
I will chair if so chosen by the committee.
Okay. Second? Anybody second that nomination?
Second.
Okay. Lori seconds that nomination. Any other nominations? And Adam Gallagher just joined us from Dane County. So we're in the process of, we've got a nomination for Sean and a second as chair. He's already been approved as the public member. Okay. So any other nominations for chair of the Joint Review Board? Going once, twice, three times? Seeing none? All those in favor of Sean Paff as the chair of the Joint Review Board say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay. Sean, you're the chair. I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, fellow members. It's an honor to be back. Just a quick introduction. I served as chair of this committee, I think 4 years ago. I appreciate Mayor Arata Frata asking me to serve again as a former mayor of the city and someone who believes in this committee and the city government. Again, thank you for letting me choose to serve. I've always appreciated this committee because it's a joint committee, and it's amazing to be working with such colleagues from Dane County, the Technical College, 3 different school districts, as we all know. So it's a very good committee, but very complex committee. Of course, it's always great to see our colleagues from Ellers, again, to work with them. So, Mike, we do have a quorum, obviously, and all members are present, correct? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Approval of minutes, Mike, I think there's no minutes in front of us, is there correct?
We're waiting. Our city clerk directed us to wait until the next meeting.
Okay.
Because then we'll have all the members present, because the last meetings are from the annual reports, and we'll be doing those again at our next meeting, as well as a consideration of these TIDs. So we're going to take care of that all at once at the next meeting.
So, Mike, in item 5A, 5, I would review responsibility of the Joint Review Board. Just real quick before we do that, I turn over to Mr. Zimmerman. Just start with you, Adam. Just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Adam Gallagher, Dane County Treasurer, representing the county.
Lori, why don't you introduce yourself?
Lori Gregg. I'm the CFO at Madison Area Technical College.
And a fellow Blue Bill, but she knows that. And Bob, why don't you introduce yourself?
Bob Soldner, I'm the Assistant Super for Financial Services, Madison School District.
Thank you, Bob. Pete?
I am Pete Grinder. I am the Finance Director for the Verona Area School District.
And Mike, do we have anyone from Madison? Great, Madison Schools.
Bob is from.
Bob's Madison and
Bob is from Madison, and Pete is from
Oregon. Anybody from Oregon? Sir, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Darren Bush from Rutabaga Paddle Sports.
Okay.
Mostly for the team.
Do we have anybody from Oregon?
No, there's not.
Nothing from Oregon, okay.
Right.
All right, and then
It's just Madison and Verona
our two
school
colleagues from
districts.
Ellers, if you introduce yourself.
Greg Johnson from Ellers.
Ariana Schmidt-Fellers.
Great. Madam Mayor, anything you'd like to say before we start? Okay, thank you. All right, with that, Mike, I'm going to turn over to you and whatever fellow staff and Ellers of what the responsibility of this committee is and why we're here.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. So the purpose of the Joint Review Board, as many of you know, it's a statutory group that's required to convene anytime a city is looking at amending or creating a TIP district. This is the first step in the process. We'll talk about the process and the timeline going forward. You satisfied your requirements for this meeting, which was to appoint the public member and to name a chairperson. And the next item on the agenda, we'll be walking through the 3 TID actions that are before you here this evening. It's just informational only. We're talking about an amendment for TID District number 10 and then the creation of TID District 16 and 17. And we'll be going through the statutory findings required for both amendments and TID creation. So if anyone has any questions on your responsibilities, I'm happy to answer those.
Seeing none, continue.
So I think next we'll get right into kind of the background and overview of why we're here today. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes the findings that were included in the project plan. There's no new material that's being presented in this document. This is just kind of an executive summary to walk through all of the detail that was included in the 3 project plans that were distributed as part of the agenda packet.
Real quick before you start, Mike, just for the public's knowledge, we rely on folks like the Ellers for what reason, just so the public?
They're the city's financial advisors and have been our financial advisors since the early to mid-90s.
So they've worked with us through many TIDs, of course.
Yes.
Thank you.
We rely on them and their expertise, and they guide us through that process, and they've helped us get multiple bond rating upgrades.
Thank you for that. Go ahead and keep going.
So we'll speak first to the timeline, just in terms of the process. So we're starting here this evening with the initial meeting of the Joint Review Board. Later on this evening, there will be a public hearing before the Plan Commission at 6:30 to go through all of this same information. There are resolutions that the Plan Commission will consider amending TID District 10 and creating TID District 16 and 17. August 8th, the same information will be presented to the Common Council, where they'll have similar resolutions to amend TID 10 and create 16 and 17. And then probably before we leave here this evening, we'll talk about looking at some potential dates for scheduling of the final Joint Review Board meeting, which we're targeting the week of August 28th. That will be to formally consider all the information we'll discuss here this evening, and then also satisfy the annual meeting requirement. We'll give updates on existing TIP districts within the city. So for the TID amendment and the TID creation, approval is required at all of these steps. So those will only come back to you if that approval is received from both the Planning Commission and the Common Council.
Question for this committee real briefly. This is just a simple majority vote once it gets to us. So if the district dead, it's just a simple majority vote.
That's correct, simple majority vote.
Okay, thank you.
Just briefly, I'm going to give kind of a quick recap of kind of how a tax incremental finance district works. Many of you are familiar, but I'll just give the quick recap. So when a TIP district is created or territory is added to an existing district, the property value at the time the district is created or brought into an existing district, that is referred to as the base value of the district, the amended territory brought into an existing district. All the taxing jurisdictions continue to collect their share of tax revenue on that existing property value, just as they do now. The financial benefit and power of a TIP district is when that value increases over the value at the time the district was created or brought into an existing district. That is called the incremental value, and the city retains all of the tax revenue from that incremental value to use it to pay for project expenses. So what a TIP district is, in essence, is a partnership between the city and the other taxing jurisdictions. As members of the other taxing jurisdictions, jurisdictions are agreeing to forego your share of taxes on that new incremental value until such time as the TID district closes, under the premise that but for the use of tax incremental financing, that development may not materialize in the same time frame at the same value, or there are costs that are necessary for that development to come to fruition that the TIF is helping to finance. In terms of the tax rate, again, whether you're in a TIF district or outside of a TIF district, you pay the same tax rate. The only distinction is where that tax revenue goes. So the city keeps it, the share of all the tax revenue collected from that incremental value, and all taxing jurisdictions will continue to collect their share of tax revenue just as they do now on that initial base value of the property. So why do communities use TIF? I've mentioned kind of one of the primary reasons is that it requires kind of cost sharing and participation in that partnership with all the other taxing jurisdictions to help promote economic development or redevelopment. Uses it as a financial tool to help the city leverage additional financial resources to help pay for infrastructure or other project costs that are necessary to promote that development. And while it's also a partnership between the city and the other taxing jurisdictions, by extension, it's also a partnership between the public and private sectors trying to bring development and redevelopment opportunities forward. So the impacts of TIF district, as I mentioned, whether you're in a TIF district or not, you pay the same tax rate. The only difference is where that tax revenue goes. If you're being brought into a TIF district, either through a creation or an amendment, it does not unilaterally change the existing zoning of your property. That still requires all the separate approvals that are required for zoning changes. Does not make it any easier for the city to use eminent domain. That requires its own statutory approvals as well. All projects that are identified in the TID project plan require separate approval to go forward. The TIF project plan makes certain expenses TIF eligible. It does not commit the city to undertake any of the projects identified in the plan. That will require separate approval for infrastructure projects or development incentives, require approvals from the Common Council through a development agreement. If the taxable value increases and the district recovers all of its obligations, all the taxing jurisdictions benefit when the district closes. The city in the last 2 years has closed some larger TIF districts, so you've seen the impact of that here in Fitchburg directly. If for some reason at the end of a TIF district, the district underperforms, the municipality that has created that district assumes all the financial risk. So those are kind of some of the key underlying tests and kind of factors of how TIF districts impact certain functions here at the city. Next, I'm going to just give a high-level overview before we go through the detail of each of the TID actions that the city is bringing forth. First is Tax Incremental District number 10. This is an amendment to that existing district. The city is adding territory to facilitate some existing development and redevelopment opportunities. Portions of the territory within this district were previously in the town of Madison and have since been absorbed by the city of Fitchburg. Part of this area has been part of previous studies that the city has commissioned, which was the North Fish Hatchery Road Visioning and Implementation Plan, which had identified tax and rental financing as a tool to potentially accomplish the objectives of those plans. TID District number 16 is a new TID creation that's in the Madison School District. This is commonly referred to as the Rimrock area, and it also encompasses areas that are part of the Southdale neighborhood. This district as well includes some territory that was also previously within the town of Madison. And then finally, TID District number 17, a new district that's in the Verona School District. The western edge of this district is commonly referred to as the Anton Drive area. The eastern edge, commonly referred to as the Arrowhead area. Both of those areas have been encompassed into previous studies that the city identified to help promote development and redevelopment within those areas. So this is really kind of an effort on the city's part to kind of continue some coordinated and targeted redevelopment and development opportunities. I guess, Mike, is there anything you wanted to add before we go through the details?
No, I think I would just reinforce that they kind of align with 3 of our neighborhood plans, west, central, and east. And then they also align with our Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative as well, where we're looking at reinvestment and revitalization in those healthy neighborhoods.
all three of these TIF districts, TID 10 is an existing rehabilitation district, and TID 16 and TID 17 are proposed as a rehabilitation district as well. I listed here, and this was also included in the project plan, the statutory criteria that has to be satisfied to create a rehabilitation district. So it can kind of include any of the 4 items that are listed. I think the common ones are kind of carrying out plans for voluntary programs for rehabilitation of buildings or other improvements, addressing some specific deficiencies that may exist on some parcels, installation or construction of streets, utilities, parks, and playgrounds, or other improvements necessary for an urban renewal project, or the disposition for uses in accordance with the objectives of the urban renewal project for property acquired in the area of the project. So as we go through each of the districts, we'll be talking about kind of the findings that the city made to satisfy this criteria. There was a parcel grid included for each of the parcels incorporated into the district that identified whether or not these criteria apply to a particular parcel. The statutory test is that at least 50% of the area has to meet this criteria. So that's the statutory finding. It's been satisfied for all 3, but we'll walk through how it's been applied to each district.
Just a process question, Mike. Do we want to have speakers at the end or now?
I think maybe when we go through the districts there, I think Darren's here for TID 16. And I think Dwayne is here for TID 16 as well.
Okay, all right, good, thank you. Go ahead, thank you.
So some common elements in all 3 of the project plans. Generally the project costs that have been identified are public infrastructure improvements that the city can either fund directly, can offer development incentives to reimburse the developer that's paying for that infrastructure, or some combination of both. All 3 of the project plans include incentives that the city can choose to award on a project-by-project basis. It's been the city's practice to require any developer that requests an incentive to go through a detailed pro forma review to substantiate a financial gap exists and TIF participation is necessary. Any incentives that are awarded are required to be incorporated into a development agreement that gets approved by the Common Council. And then each project plan includes ongoing annual costs that the city typically charges to each of its TID districts for the audit, TID reporting, and legal reviews. So we'll talk about the projects in each of the plans specifically, but at a high level, this is what all 3 of the plans address.
I would just add on that the city also requires for any TIF incentive request a deposit that the developer puts down that goes through the pro forma review with Ellers. Of course, we do that on the front end.
So anytime a TIF district is amended or new TIF districts are created, one of the statutory tests that has to be satisfied is what's called the Equalized value test. And when you're doing simultaneous amendments or creations, as we're proposing here this evening, that test gets applied uniquely to each district. So for example, when we do the 12% test for TID 10, we're not factoring in TID 16 or TID 17 to that calculation. We're only factoring in districts that exist at the time each of these TID actions is taking place.
Can you just further describe the 12% test?
Yes. So what that 12% test is that the existing incremental value of existing districts plus the base value of any of the territory of an amended district or a new district that's being created, those 2 numbers combined cannot exceed 12% of the city's total equalized valuation. So let's use TID 10 as an example. So the amount of value that's subject to the 12% test is about $560,185,000. Then we look at the existing TIF districts that are in place. TID 4 has been terminated. TID 9 is incremental value. TID 10 is incremental value. TID 11 has no incremental value. And TID 12 and TID 13 have incremental value. TID 14, while created, has not been open long enough to have any incremental value. And then TID 15, which was a TID district that the city inherited from the town of Madison, has been terminated, so that doesn't apply to this 12% test either. So in the case of TID district number 10, the area that's being added to the district has a current value that's a little over $47,563,000. When we add that to the incremental value of the existing districts that are subject to this test, the total value comes out to about $318,300,000. That is below the 12% maximum of $560,185,000. So we did the same calculation for TID 16 and then the same calculation for TID 17. So the base value of all three of those districts, either the territory being added in TID 10 or the existing parcel value for TID 16 and TID 17, plus the incremental value of the existing districts, is all under that 12% test limit. So we satisfy that, which means the city can proceed with these proposed amendment and the two creations.
I actually lived long enough to see TID 4 close. As someone who saw that amended 16 different times, you guys finally closed that thing.
Very successful, Tim. Did a lot of heavy lifting for the city and all the taxing.
That was the gerrymander of TIDs.
So now let's get into each of the TID actions specifically. So first is TID District number 10. You'll see kind of the map inset that's included on the slide. That's included in your project plan as well. So the territory that's highlighted in various shades of blue are the territory that's already within the existing district boundary, and then the areas that are highlighted in red are what are proposed to be added to this proposed district.
So Mike, is this just south of the belt line? So like Kentucky Fried Chicken and stuff in there, or what are we
No, we're talking the west side of Fish Hatchery Road where the Zimbrick dealerships are in the red along Bryant Road. That was formerly the town of Madison and now Fitchburg as of October of last year. And then the property on the east side of Fish Hatchery Road, west of Index primarily, there that includes the Ridge and Avalon senior housing, sleep clinic, and dialysis that are back in that area. And then a couple of parcels right on the northeast corner there too, just east of Index Road. Okay, to square that off.
Everybody follow where this is located? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So again, the primary purpose is to identify specific public infrastructure improvements or development incentives that the city anticipates will be needed to facilitate redevelopment within this added territory. And again, the finding that we need to make is that not less than 50% of this area meets the statutory definition of an area in need of rehabilitation or conservation. So for each of the parcels that were being added to this TIF district, they're all identified on the maps that were included within the project plan. And then we identified on the criteria applied column on the far right, which of these parcels may have exhibited some of the statutory criteria of an area in need of rehabilitation or conservation. And a lot of the findings really are related to infrastructure improvements that are needed adjacent to these properties, specifically improvements along Bryant Road and addressing some access concerns as well. So that's the primary finding that's been identified and is applicable to this area being added to the TIF district. So when you add territory to a TIF district, you have to kind of go back and remake the finding for the entire boundary of the TIF district. So this TIF district was created back in 2015. There were originally about 4.75 acres included within that TIF district. All of it was identified as an area in need of rehabilitation. This district was amended back in 2018 to add some additional territory. 200 acres were added at that time. About 161 of those were identified as in need of rehabilitation. So we're well over the 50% threshold. When you get into the second amendment back in 2023, that added about 33 acres. About 29 of that was identified in need of rehabilitation. And then there's right-of-way throughout the TIF district as well. So the total acreage is about 258 acres. 195 of those have been identified as in need of rehabilitation. So we're at 75%, so we're well over the 50% threshold.
So when the rehabilitation acres, does that include the half mile outside of this, or no?
No, it just includes the physical boundary within the boundary of the TID district, including right-of-way.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that half mile question later, but.
So we included, kind of just for historical purposes, all the list of the project costs that were originally included within this project plan. So originally, through all the original creation and then the subsequent amendments, there was about $55 million of project costs that were identified within this district. And then when we look at the project cost that were added in the TID number 2 amendment, that added in about total cost was about $9 million of additional project costs. So all those continue to remain TID eligible expenditures. The city retains that authority. We just recited the expenses, so you didn't have to go find documents from several years ago. And so when we look at what's being kind of proposed in the financial analysis, we'll walk through the details, but we've really only, to be conservative, projected increased value from projects that are in progress and have already been approved. The estimated tax increment collected over the life of the district totals about $49 million. The cash flow model is an illustration only of how the projects could be funded. As I said in the beginning, by including these project costs in a project plan, it does not commit the city to undertake any of these projects. That all requires separate approval, but we've illustrated how those project costs could be funded, and right now the estimated closure of the district is in 2042. So here we show kind of the historical history of the incremental value that's been created in this district since it was created. As of January 1st of 2021, approximately $61 million of value had been created in this district. The existing development along Ocala Drive is estimated to generate another $32 million of value. And then a parcel that's under construction, parcel number 67, or the Avalon project, that's projected to add another $29.1 million of incremental value. So again, trying to be conservative, only forecasting projects that have been approved and are anticipated to be under construction over the course of the next several years.
So those columns, if you could go back a second, so from 2026 to 2042, annual total is 0. That just means nothing has been slated for those years yet?
We've just been conservative, and we'll update. This gets updated every year and presented to the Joint Review Board,
Got
so
it.
it's kind of
So something could populate on
Oh,
the next one.
absolutely. Yeah, we're trying to be conservative and not be too aggressive, since this is an existing district.
This is really a stress test as far as how conservative we are. There's multiple projects that are already in the visioning and discussion phases, but until we have really more specific details and we know a project's coming forward, we want to err on the side of caution.
Got it. Perfect.
So this is just the increment forecast, as I mentioned, over the remaining life of the district with that existing value and those projects that I just identified. So over the 27-year life of the district, projecting that the total increment collected would be about $49 million. So we've included the detailed cash flow analysis. This was in the cash flow projection. I'll just work my way across this from left to right. So what we have is the revenues on the far left-hand side. The tax increment is the primary revenue source for this particular district. We have expenses. An MRO refers to a municipal revenue obligation. That's a developer incentive that the city has agreed to for the Plesco project. So we show total estimated principal payment or total payments for that incentive that's been awarded. In 2019, the city financed some of the Fish Hatchery Road improvements. That debt service is outstanding. Another development incentive for 3101 South Fish Hatchery Road. That incentive is being paid by this district. The remainder of the TID 10 portion of the Fish Hatchery Road projects was financed in 2020, so that debt service is outstanding. And then we have an estimated debt service payment for the development in place on Ocala Road. And then we just show a hypothetical $5 million development incentive repaid with interest and some financing of some of the infrastructure projects identified within this amendment. And then we just forecast other expenses of the district going forward. So the district is in a deficit position at the moment, but is kind of recovering that as incremental value gets projected. So to Mike's point, this is kind of a conservative stress test. If really nothing happened in this district in terms of development and increase in value beyond what is already under construction, and the city still undertook some project costs, it would have the ability to do so and still, potentially close the district a few years early. So we're looking at this from kind of a higher cost, lower revenue, to kind of be conservative from a financial standpoint. And we'll, this gets updated every year and presented to the Joint Review Board. So this is just kind of a forecast of looking at the impact of taking on some of the projects through this amendment.
And the MRO pay-as-you-go developer bond is Fitchburg's business model for development incentive requests. Can I just highlight just three of the kind of project cost items that just wanted to mention as part of this amendment? One is the Bryant Road reconstruction. That, again, that area that was previously the town of Madison. If you've driven on it recently, it's in desperate need of repair and reconstruction there. So we want to work with the property owners on that on both the east and the west side. So that's one infrastructure item. The other thing that we're really pleased to report is that North Fish Hatchery Road from the Beltline down to McKee Road is going to be part of the bus rapid transit system in the greater Madison region here. So we finance some of the station platforms, and one of the buses is part of that system for Fitchburg's participation, which is then going to help us drive more density and development along the corridor. So we're really excited about the opportunities.
And the road was built to already deal
This
with.
infrastructure goes down the middle. Yeah, just like they're doing on, is it Mineral Point Road? Yeah. And some other ones where it's currently being installed. Yeah. And then the third one we just want to mention is, and the parcel at 2876 Index Road. It's a market rate multifamily apartment project that's under construction. But as we all know, there's an affordable housing, everybody's concerned about affordable housing in the greater Madison region and how do we increase that supply. And we're looking to implement a pilot program. We're working on the program parameters with Ellers and Associates to look to incorporate, with some TIF assistance, possibly 10% of the units within a market rate building to be at 60% of median income as a workforce housing development initiative. So that building that has a foundation in on Index Road is going to be market rate. But for us later this year, if the TID is approved and we've got the program parameters in place, the developers are willing to be a pilot project with us to see how that model works. We got this idea from Shorewood Hills, John Flatt, both in the Boulevard building on University Avenue and the Lodge buildings across from Target. We went and toured those a couple years ago, and each of those projects had that business model with participation from Shorewood Hills through TIP, and we think that's a really healthy way to integrate more affordable housing within Fitchburg.
Don't want to step on anything else on District 10?
I don't.
Okay, so I want to just point out item C on the list. I know that sounds like a real, what are they doing there, but the kiosks and stuff on North Fish Hatchery Road, just for you folks, if you're asking that, because that's kind of easy political stuff to go after. The placemaking has been just incredibly successful on Fish Hatchery Road. People kind of know where they are, and the branding has worked. And it didn't take Mike a lot to convince people to do that, but I'm glad we stuck with it the last 10 years. So that's why you see that 32,000, and that sounds like a number that could easily be taken away, fluff or whatever. But maybe just explain that.
I would just say what's really cool about that is when we were working on the original Fish Hatchery Road project, placemaking and wayfinding was something that we really heard from the citizen committee that helped guide us and everything. Right. And this is the area of Fitchburg that developed when we were still a town, and we're transforming it into the city of Fitchburg of today. And it now looks like the city of Fitchburg with the generational road reconstruction up there. And we're getting not only local but regional, state, and national awards through Public Works and Engineering Associations, and we just put in for another award. And it's not only the look and feel of the placemaking and the infrastructure and the investments that we made, but it's also what it has spurred in private sector investment in the corridor. We hope that if we built it, they would come, and the private sector has responded, and there's more in the pipeline and on the way that we don't even have incorporated into the performance.
So I just want to point that out to members of the board, important. Just so if you get asked from the public, what is this, that's important. Any other questions on TID 10 before our friends from Ellers continue on? We have no speakers for TID 10. Anything from the Tech College or Madison Schools on this one? County, Adam? Okay, Mike, anything else for us?
No, I think Greg gave a really good overview on that one.
Greg, anything else on TID 10?
No, I'm ready to move on.
Okay, so we're at 6B, and Mike, you want the speakers afterwards or before on 6B?
Whatever.
All right, why don't we do it first? Dwayne, why don't you come on up and walk us through why you're here. Dwayne Steinhauer of 313 West Beltline. Grab a seat, sir, and just state your name and where you're from and why you're here.
Dwayne Steinhauer. We have the properties at 313 and 319 West Beltline. And I've also had conversation with the owner of property number 11, which is next to us,
Yep.
the mini storage area. And he happens to be out of the country on vacation, so he could not be here. But he also, what we were going to request is for the TIF to end after number 10 and just take us completely out of the new TIF district, because his property is only 5 years old and should have a lot of longevity. And our properties, I think, are in reasonable repair. As I was listening to the explanation of number 10, and a lot of what the funding is going for is street repair and things like that, infrastructure. And the thing that popped into my mind hearing all that was, is there planned obsolescence when there's potential to have TIF district to the municipalities, then kind of let things go, figuring that they can get it put in because it needs rehab. And the highway in front of our buildings was redone 10 or 15 years ago by the town of Madison and the state. So there shouldn't be any of that kind of work necessary in front of our 4 or 5 properties. So we're making a polite request that perhaps we could just be removed from it. I don't know what the financial considerations are for the TIF.
Sure.
For us doing that, I'm not able to calculate that stuff, but that's what we're here for.
Okay, we'll have Greg, the expert, explain all this at the end. Any questions for Mr. Steinhauer? Any questions on what his request is? My question for you, sir, would be, have you talked to city staff about your request?
I did talk to the lady over here, I've forgotten her first name.
Joyce, yep.
Joyce.
Mike's colleague, yep.
Okay, and our concern is that once we're into a TIF district, it comes under the state code for redevelopment districts, and the ability of the review board and the plan commission, once you're in a redevelopment district, makes condemnation and accessibility much easier. So we don't foresee that we're going to be changing our use or want to, and we think our buildings are in pretty sound condition.
Briefly explain your business for the group, would you please?
319 is the original Nedra Bose building.
Yep.
And we currently have a pawn shop with a 25-year lease in there, and Pitcher's Pub downstairs with a 15-year lease. And we have some other rental spaces. One of them is getting empty at the end of this month, but I expect that to be filled relatively soon. The 313 building was the Genesis Innovation Center.
Yes.
Built by, what was the company that built it?
Lunar.
Built
The gentleman's name that ran that, I can't remember. I remember.
Lunar built.
Adam would know him.
Lunar built the 313 building in 3 sections.
Okay.
The first section is closest to the highway. That's 100 by 100, 2 stories, basement and first floor. The second section is 100 by 100, 2 stories, basement and first floor. And then the third section was built, I believe, in the late 80s or early 90s, all by Lunar for them. And then when they finally sold it, because they outgrew it, they couldn't stay there. The third section is 100 by 100 with a second and first story and basement. And then there's a loading dock on the back end to service the warehousing. We have currently between 25 and 35 tenants. It changes sometimes. We choose one this month, and I haven't looked it up, but we have multiple tenants. We have the moving company. We have a car repossession company. We've got 3 cleaning companies. We've got a museum. We've got 2 bookstores. We've got 3 churches. We have a complete mix of tenants who all seem to get along pretty well. And one of the things that we realize that we're under rented dollar-wise, but all my tenants are on month-to-month leases, because at some point I hope to sell the building, and if the person that buys it wants to take over a good portion of it for their own business, we'll be able to relocate the tenants to help that out. So we're probably under rented by 10 to 15%.
Okay.
To do that.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions for the gentleman here? We'll get into that and have city staff kind of walk through some of that stuff at the end of the presentation. Thank you, Greg, or Dwayne, for being here. Darren Bush, do you want to say a few words?
Just a few.
Just introduce yourself and where you are located in our city.
From Riverview Paddle Sports. I'm number 19 since December 3rd.
Congratulations on opening over there.
Thanks. Yeah, it's going well. It's going well. Just so you know, we installed an oxygenating system in the pond there, and about $40,000. The water quality in that pond is better than any lake in Madison right now. Our dissolved oxygen at the surface is 14 milligrams per deciliter, and that's the top of Mendota is 7. So the fish there are really happy. The water is clear. It's really a cool project. When I come see it, I'll show it.
That's where our next meeting should be, Mike.
I gotta tell you, the water quality, we swim in it, it's great, and it's a really cool process. You wanna see it. Anyway, it's cool. I can tell you about it. The solar's going great. We have negative power company we have negative power bills right now, which will help us as we go into the winter.
Have you relocated everything from Monona here?
Correct. Yeah, my old building is now a hole in the ground. We moved because that building was falling apart, and the lease was coming up. I said I can't stay there. The dentist practice next door bought it, and they were going to remodel it, and they got into it and said, no, we're tearing it down.
Okay.
So we're really glad to hear. We built a building the last 100 years. It's really cool. Come see it if you haven't. So that was fun. The downside of 19 is that I started the building when I was in the town of Madison, and I finished the building when I was in the city of Fitchburg. And because of that, there was just a lot of moving parts. There were 4 different permitting. I mean, the county was involved, Madison was involved. And I can tell you, I put my sign up after November 1st when we closed, because I knew that the sign permit from Fitchburg would be like, oh yeah, awesome, looks great. And I thought it might be harder before that. So it's awesome. Now, 18 is a project that I'd like to work on. I have a partner, Blake George. Most of you know him.
Sure.
Originally, the plan for my building, where I am now, was to be a bottom floor and then 3 stories of apartment above it, to be mostly workforce housing. But because of the timeline, because of the old TIF closing, and because of having 3 different entities involved in it, it was just a mess. So we just had to move forward because I didn't have a building to live in anymore. But we want to do that on the second one, and the plan is right now retail on the bottom. We have identified a tenant, bike shop, which is pretty cool, and then 3 stories, and we're trying to do majority workforce housing. The trouble there is the soils are really, really bad. Like we found out when we started digging, we've got 149 pilings around the outside of the building, so it doesn't sink into the peat. An unexpected expense, which because there was a TIF district, I had to absorb it, and that's life. We have those problems on 18 as well. It's pretty bad. It's better than where I was because it's a couple feet higher, but the peat amount there. On our building, it was 6 feet of peat, and the last one was 60 feet. So if we hadn't put pilings in, it just would have kind of done that. So the question I had is, you said 10% workforce housing.
That's the program parameter we're trying to put together with Ellershed. We don't have it put together yet.
Is that the lowest we can go? Because I'm trying to do a good thing. I mean, my employees are paying incredible rents right now in Madison. It's not my primary.
Why don't we, Darren, get through the project, talk about it, and then Mike can maybe answer that question towards the end, if that's okay. Or you guys can continue over time working.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if that's a possibility.
I'll defer to staff and Greg.
Okay, great.
Any questions for Mr. Bush? Thank you for coming to Fitchburg.
Thanks.
Just a little historical note for the committee. On lot number 18, Mike Zimmerman and Jim Doyle and Sean Paff were the bill signing to create that TID in 2004. So that's a long time ago. We've changed state law to create this TID. So a little history in that spot.
That's amazing.
All right, with that, we're going to turn over to Greg and keep moving here. Thank you, Darren. Stick around. Get your questions answered.
So as with the other TID districts, we'll speak to the specific costs, but the general project costs that have been identified are infrastructure improvements and development incentives as needed to facilitate development or redevelopment within the district. And then as a rehabilitation district, again, have to demonstrate that at least 50% of the area meets the statutory definition. So to that end, we've included the rehabilitation findings chart. This was included in the project plan as well. So this is kind of the first run of parcels 1 through 24. We show the total acreage for each parcel, and then those parcels that had identified as satisfying the rehabilitation criteria, mainly just some older buildings, some underutilized land, and areas that would benefit from additional access proposed by some of the specific infrastructure improvements included within the project plan. And then the balance of the properties 25 through 43, only a handful of those were identified as meeting the rehabilitation criteria. So the total acreage within the district is approximately 61 acres. 34 and a half of those have been identified as satisfying the rehabilitation criteria. And so we're at 57% on that test. So we're over the 50% threshold.
Greg, could you go back one slide? Which properties are Mr. Steinhauer's here, the first speaker? You know, Mike?
Under 13, 14, and 15.
13, 14, and 15.
12. Yeah, there's a little sliver of 12 in there too.
Okay, 12, 13, okay. All right, that was what the first speaker was speaking about to the committee. And 18 is yours, right, Mr. Bush?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Greg.
17 and 18.
17 and 18.
So in terms of the specific project costs that were identified for TID District 16, there's some street improvement projects. The extension of Latitude 43 Drive is identified as a priority, as long as some design and reconstruction of Baloney Drive. So those are the street projects that are included. As I mentioned, all the project plans include allowances for development incentives or CETA contributions to fund redevelopment efforts here in Fitchburg. Portion of the project costs for the neighborhood plan redevelopment, the wayfinding and placemaking that we discussed with TID 10 is also incorporated into this district. And then there's some stormwater improvements and additional improvements along Latitude 43, the extension to Pheasant Ridge Trail, and then stormwater improvements, and then the ongoing TID administrative and professional costs. So all those projects add up to a little over 19.6 million. The TID is identified to potentially support 18.7 of those. Portion of those are identified as non-TID costs, meaning that they also benefit areas outside the TID district. So under statute, those would not be repaid by the TID. Those would be paid by other city funds. And then we've identified projects that fall within a half-mile radius. If those benefit the district, those can be included as eligible expenses as well. And then we've included a rough estimate on when these projects would be undertaken.
I would just add on that on the infrastructure items. Latitude 43 is kind of a connectivity extension to the west in the neighborhood to open up that area. Maloney Drive reconstruction is for, there's a proposal for a infill development with ownership townhome product there that we think would be really good for the neighborhood. And then there's a bike trail connection that would be kind of a boardwalk on the west side of County Trunk Highway MM, connecting the Cap City Bike Trail north into the Southdale neighborhood and the Novation campus. So those are some of the main infrastructure items. And then as part of this, you also see an update to the Southdale neighborhood plan. So that plan goes back a number of years. A lot has changed in the economy since then. So we would like to do a refresh of that neighborhood plan. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't include the significant existing multifamily residential housing there. We would like to go through that neighborhood plan update first, and then depending on the outcome and the findings of that, maybe we come back later with an amendment depending on where we're at with the property owners. We didn't want to be dealing with any decrement issues. That was one thing.
So kind of the summary of the financial analysis for TID 16. The valuation projections we prepared are really an illustration to show the full build-out potential of the district. I mean, it's kind of just, again, saying if all of this area develops over a certain period of time, using that illustration just to show how much value potentially could be constructed, using about $94 million over the life of the district. The tax increment based on that $94 million in value is estimated to be approximately $39 million. Again, the cash flow for a new district, it's an illustration, shows how projects could be funded. Again, the project plan does not commit the city to undertake any of these projects. That all requires separate approval by the Common Council. The projected closure is in 2043. So we included kind of on some of the specific parcels, some potential redevelopment and new development opportunities over the life of the district, depending on some particular proposed land uses, commercial, mixed use, hotel, multifamily. Again, this is an illustration of kind of what could transpire, not a guarantee of what's going to happen within the district, which kind of shows build out over the first 11 years of the district.
And our partners on those with the development assumptions with the vacant land, a lot of that information was provided by the Alexander Company and folks like Darren that had some of those vacant parcels. So we've been in communication with them.
So if that value materializes at $94 million, this just shows again about $39 million in tax revenue over the 27-year life of the district. And then we just show a cash flow illustration based on that revenue stream, financing some infrastructure improvements in 2025 and 2028. And then we show 3 separate development incentives as an illustration only. That pay-as-you-go model, that increment can be paid out as a development incentive, and then the ongoing administrative costs. So really the city's practice historically with its TIF districts has been to really match the pace of capital investment and the occurrence of costs, whether it be a development incentive to match the pace of development. That's the fundamental key to successful TIF management, is to not expend the cost well in advance of the development. So I think the city's done that well historically, as we've seen with the closure of 2 large TIF districts over the last 2 years, the existing management of existing districts. So this is very much an illustration subject to precise implementation execution as development proposals come forth. Mike, anything you want to add on TID 16?
No, I think you've got it all, covered all the bases.
Any questions from the group on TID 16?
I think maybe the only thing I would add,
Yes, if you can address them.
Mr. Steinhauer's comments and everything. Fitchburg's approach to TID is we kind of put the parcels in the district if there's an opportunity for kind of reinvestment, revitalization, or redevelopment there. But it's not anything that's required as far as being in the district. You might see on the development assumption page, TID number or parcel number 11, the self-storage, the new one that you mentioned, Dwayne, that's been there 5 years. We don't even have a development assumption included in the project pro forma for that one because we understand, it's a brand new investment at that site. But I know you mentioned even, maybe I think it was on the parcel number 15, maybe you might.
Could you just go back to that real
You
quick?
might look to sell that building, maybe in the future and everything. That's where a TID could be helpful, because you might have a potential interested party that maybe would like to work with the city as they're negotiating with you to acquire that building, that maybe wants to do some upgrades, reinvestment, revitalization. So by having your properties in the TID district, it allows us to have that in our toolkit, but there's no requirement that you have to do anything with your buildings by having it in the TID district.
So can I just ask Greg could you address the eminent domain question? Because I know when I talked to Mr. Steinhauer, that was a big concern of his, that the city was going to come in and try and purchase a property or take it. And I think if we can kind of give, I tried to explain that's not the city's policy, never has been, and he does have concerns about that.
Yeah, and whether you're in a TIP district or not does not change the statutory process for eminent domain. So, if the city would choose to go through that process, I think you're hearing there's no plans as of now to do that. But if the city went through that, the statutory process to go through eminent domain is not impacted whether you're in a TIP district or not. It's exactly the same.
Obviously, we're going to let Mr. Steiner and Mike and Joyce and Chad and others talk about this, but the question to Mike, or the city manager, do we do correspondence of understanding that this, or we kind of quantify this for these guys, or do we write it out, have legal opinion that we can't eminent domain to just give him some peace, or how do we do that if members don't?
I guess we haven't.
Have we done that?
I don't think we've used eminent domain in the time I've been with the city, and that's over 20 years, and there's been no conversations about using it for any parcels related to any of these TID projects, TID districts. So I think you have our assurances that there's nothing even conversationally about the use of that word. We don't take that word lightly around here.
It's usually more incentive-based and kind of collaborative-oriented.
Right. Okay. Any questions? One comment, sir, come on up, and then we're going to keep moving on because we got a 6:30 deadline here. We want to keep going for
The thing I forgot to say in my earlier, when you looked at the chart, my 313 building and my 319 building
right there,
were identified as being in need of rehabilitation. And I asked Joyce about who made those evaluations, and she said the committee did by walking by them or something. I didn't understand how the process was done, but I don't know if indeed those could be evaluated again, and maybe they shouldn't be in the rehab category. And that's the other thing. As far as the assurance that Fitchburg has never used eminent domain,
it is the law too. It's right. It's state law. Or is it a law that we can't do that? Is that right?
Right.
No. This board gets the right of eminent domain.
This board doesn't, not the joint review
Or
board.
the TIF district does, because it's a redevelopment. Well, I was reading state law today, and it says redevelopment districts have the right of eminent domain.
Any property has the right of eminent domain. It's just whether or not the city chooses to exercise it or not.
So it'd be an act of common council would have to.
And I understand that you've never done it, and those people sitting here don't foresee it, but we all know that the people sitting at these tables change.
Right, but the law does not allow this committee to do that. If your property was to be eminent domained, that would be an act of the city council, not of this body. I guess my question is, Dwayne, because I want to keep rolling, I want to be respectful of you, but I think this is an off-ramp conversation that you and Mike and others can have. Okay. I guess my question for Mike is just explain the process of how businesses are outreached, or just so that he talked about a committee. How did that work? Just so he could get his answer. If you don't.
It was city staff that actually went out to the property.
And he was informed of us doing that? Or?
We had no idea they were doing that.
No, and that was Joyce and I believe Jack Pearson.
And I have over 30 years of experience
I'm just trying to, I'm not
real
putting
estate.
anybody on defense. I'm just trying to explain to
the public here. So anyway, we're gonna keep rolling, Dwayne. Your comments are well received. We got very professional city staff here. I'm assuming there'll be follow-up conversations. Chad, Mike, you guys, Joyce will do that.
We're happy to have.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Any other questions on TID 16? Moving on, keep going, TID number 17.
Okay, TID number 17, as we kind of have the map and the inset here, kind of in terms of where that was located, kind of the Anton.
And this is Verona Schools.
This is Verona Schools, yes, thank you.
Thanks for sticking around, Pete.
So again, the general purpose of this district, again, similar, kind of looking at broader infrastructure and development incentive to incorporate economic development opportunities in the Anton and Arrowhead areas. And then it's also a rehabilitation district as well. So in terms of the parcels that were identified to be included, we kind of have parcels 1 through 19 here listed, which parcels were identified as kind of meeting the rehabilitation criteria. And so the total acreage of this district, including right-of-way, is about 173 acres. 147 of those acres are identified as meeting the criteria. So we're well over 85% of the areas identified for the rehabilitation criteria.
Could you go back one slide, Greg, real quick?
Yes.
Mike, is that the number 3? Is that the Quick Trip site? Quick Trip's been knocked down, right? Which Quick Trip is that?
That's the one on Williamsburg Way, that's vacant.
Yeah, it's vacant.
Building's still there, though.
Building's still there. Yeah, it's just vacant right now.
Next to Liquor Town, right? Across kind of by.
Yeah.
Or cigar shop or something.
And Quick Trip has it
More
for
Liquor Town guy.
Quick Trip has it for sale.
Okay, all right, thank you, Greg, keep rolling.
So one of the common themes, particularly those areas along kind of the Anton corridor, is that, really kind of the access orientation has changed as a result of the infrastructure improvements kind of within that area. And so kind of, that's an area that I know the city has identified as a priority to kind of address to make the access within that area.
Is the old fire station in there?
No.
Okay.
We carved that out, but the land surrounding it is in.
Thank you.
So in terms of the project costs that have been identified, a lot of them specifically related to Anton Drive in terms of the planning, engineering, resurfacing, bike lanes, roundabout improvements, and then we have some other sidewalk improvements that have been identified as well. The allowance for development incentives, the TID administrative costs, the wayfinding and placemaking we've been discussing, some updates to the neighborhood plan, and then some other specific improvements that were identified for sidewalk and multi-path uses. So the total project costs that have been identified in this plan is $24.5 million. As I've said several times, but worth repeating, this does not commit the city to undertaking these costs. It just identifies what is a TID eligible expense.
And a lot of these project costs help to drive those recommendations that were identified in the respective neighborhood plans. Anton neighborhood plan on the west side of Verona Road, and the Arrowhead redevelopment plan on the east side of Verona Road. Now that we've all survived the 7-year road reconstruction of Verona Road.
So that was my question, Mike. So the strategy was to wait for the Verona Road construction to get done, see how businesses did.
Yep.
The city worked closely with those businesses, obviously. Then we come in with, you're coming in with this TID request now.
Exactly.
So you don't anticipate that area going through major reconstruction for hopefully 50 years.
As far as the road network.
Correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All the infrastructure, the major stuff's in place.
Right. Yeah, there's some neighborhood arterials like Anton, resurfacing and some other connectivity things with sidewalk and those types of things, some power lines on the east side and everything.
Just back one slide, Greg, if you don't mind. I appreciate the committee's patience here, but I do have a question. So Mike, the sound walls and all that stuff were done by state DOT for those neighborhoods and stuff. We don't have any of that infrastructure here in this TID because all that major road construction's done, correct?
That was all part of the Verona Road.
And that was paid for by the state?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So similar to TID 16, we've just, for illustration purposes, kind of modeled a full build-out potential of this district. Looked at about 113 million of value phased in over time. If that materialized, that would result in about 48.6 million of tax increment revenue. The cash flow model illustrates how those various project costs that we just discussed could be funded. The projected closure based on this full build-out illustration is in 2046. So we've identified the particular parcels, identified it within the boundaries and potential uses. Again, just looking at build-out over about a 12-year period over the 27-year life of the district. Here's the increment projection in terms of what that would collect over the 27-year life of the district. And then the cash flow model for illustration kind of again shows project costs being incurred as increment gets generated. First potential financing of infrastructure based on projected timelines in 2027. We've modeled out multiple development incentives, that could be issued with some interest repayment. So again, showing that, the district potentially could close early. As I mentioned with TID 16, this will be updated annually as project costs are incurred and development comes forward. This is really just kind of an illustration of the potential of the district based on its 27-year maximum.
And Mike, and just this question for Pete maybe as well. Obviously Verona's got a lot going on and a lot of TIDs and a lot of great things happening out there. This doesn't conflict with any of the TIDs with a school district, anything like that, too many TIDs or anything like that. I mean, there any good conversations have been happening, I'm assuming, with the school district in the city? Question for Pete or for Mike?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't believe it. I don't believe it's going to cause any issues. But I'm also not the expert on that either, so I don't know if I can state that for certainty.
We've had conversations with Verona Area School District officials that we were creating the district.
Good, thank you. That's all. Thank you guys. Yeah, appreciate it.
And they understand as far as our emphasis on revitalization and reinvestment of this corridor, because this is kind of in that corridor leading to Verona and all the growth and development, happening there.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
So again, just to kind of recap, really our action tonight was really just the organizational items. So all of this information was informational only. It'll only be brought back, to you if this gets approved at the Plan Commission and Common Council level. So I think the only items that I think are remaining on the agenda are really discussing potential next meeting date to consider these items if they receive approval, and then also satisfy the annual meeting requirement for all of the existing active districts in the city.
Any questions on TID number 17 from the committee? Process question on TID 16, 10, 17. Verona schools would not vote on the first two, right? Since it's not in their school district.
Correct.
That's correct. And then Madison would not vote on the last one.
Correct.
Okay. Another process question. Thank you for laying it out. When we come back on date to soon be determined, we are voting a majority vote. But if we were to vote these down, then they would not proceed, correct? That would usurp the vote of the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Correct.
Yeah, approvals.
Don't get spooked, Mike. I'm just asking a question.
Approvals required by all three bodies.
Yeah.
So, but the Joint Review Board is the final.
The
step.
final. So you guys will have the ability, even though the council and the Planning Commission probably, potentially, whatever the words are, votes yes, this committee has the quote-unquote a say, the final say.
Yes.
Any questions on process? All right, Adam's got his Palm Pilot out here ready for dates. Greg, what is your suggestion again? Week of August what?
We're looking at the week of August 28th.
All right, before you go to town for Labor Day, guys, we got to see you one more time here. Seems like city government works best on a Tuesday, but Elders is in Dane County so much, so they'll probably in Sun Prairie or Cottage Grove. Are you somewhere else on Tuesday the 29th or no?
I am somewhere else.
Okay. Any other dates that week that are off for anybody? Lori, Greg, Bob, Pete, any concerns that week? What about Monday the 28th? Adam says yes. You guys are the hardest ones to get because you got a bunch of stuff going on. Mike, what do you got? Lori?
Monday the 28th doesn't work. That's a Board of Ed meeting.
Okay, we don't want to screw that up for you then. Okay. 30th is going to be tough for you guys. 31st, we're getting close to Labor Day weekend here, but we got to get her done here. The 31st, we can do that. Greg, we love you, but you got to be here on the 29th, right? Or do you not have to be here? You probably do.
I can have somebody else here if that's the date you want to
Are
meet.
you sure?
We should work with this calendar.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. What about the 31st?
That works.
31st, Adam? Yeah. All right, Lori?
That works. What time though? I think it's got to be after 3 o'clock or later.
We would, after 5:30, you said?
Oh, yeah, that works.
She said at 3? I think she said.
Okay, well, Lori, we'd probably do a 4:30 or 5. Would that work for everybody?
Can we do 5?
5 o'clock so Adam can beat the traffic. 5 o'clock on 8:31 in this room, correct, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
All right, you'll book all that logistics?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. 8:31, 5 p.m. Thank you all. Any other comments for the group? This meeting was the consideration of approval for TID 10, 16, TID 17. We meet again on August 31st at 5 p.m. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Lori, you make the motion?
Yeah, be good.
All those in favor, second by Adam, all in favor of adjourning, signify by aye.
Aye.
Thank you.